Ben Kuchera. I don't think I really need to say much about him, but
I'm being strangled by the man in the mirror.
Yeah, Ben Kuchera is a guy who's been accused of nepotism in the past with game developers and not disclosing it. And from what I understand, he has been discredited on a number of issues. And we're actually going to be talking about him today. You see, he made an article concerning Cuphead. And let's start with the title, shall we?
When is exclusion a valid design choice? The difference between what you earn and what you're owed. Ben Kuchera.
When is exclusion a valid design choice? Well, to begin with, there's nothing really preventing anyone from actually purchasing Cuphead. After all, sales do show that the game has done well. Is the game hard? Yes, but there's nothing really stopping anyone from playing the game. After all, the game is focused on timing, reactions, and learning the patterns of the bosses. It's a euphoric sensation of accomplishment that you finally managed to come up with the right weapon combination and defeat the boss that you're having a hard time with. Plus, as with everything, the more you do something, the better you become at it. It's like practicing at music or drawing. You refine your skill. As for what you're owed, I think that's some rather privileged thinking right there. The only thing stopping you from completing a game is your own drive to do so, and how much time you're willing to dedicate to it. You've purchased the game, a one-time purchase of $20, and you can keep playing as much as you'd like. If you buy an MMO game like World of Warcraft, are you entitled not to die in the dungeons? If you buy a fighting game, are you entitled to win against your opponent?
No.
Giratina forbids you actually have to be challenged in order to progress in the game.
Cuphead is a very challenging game in ways one can argue are both good and bad. Let's put that aside for the moment and ask another serious question that's at the heart of the rather nasty conversation that has sprouted up again due to the game's difficulty. Are you owed the act of finishing a game because you bought it?
No. Good night, everybody!
Do the Mario swing your arms.
I mean, there are games that people buy just for the sake of buying them. Collectors will often buy games just so they can have it on their shelves to display or to show off in their collections. There's also the possibility that people got the games as a gift, much like I have. Now, I know that's not exactly what he's going for here, but it's a two-way street in my mind. Just because you've got a game, you're not owed to complete the game. You can enjoy it as much as you want before you put it away. There's no expectation in most cases to finish a game on the part of the player, unless you're doing something akin to a review or something like that. So why should the game not get the same treatment? As Kuchera says, it's a challenging game, however it's not unfair. As someone who's on the less than stellar side of Cuphead's skill sets, most of the deaths were on my end for not fully understanding the mechanics or that I made a miscalculation. Now that's anecdotal, as that's my own experience with the game. But just because a game is challenging, that doesn't automatically mean that it's excluding a player set.
It's not as silly as it sounds at first. Video games are one of the only means of expression where you have to pass some sort of test before seeing the rest of what the experience has to offer. No one asks you to solve a logic problem before reading the last page of a book, nor are there many art galleries that ask you a quiz about the paintings that you saw in the last room before you can get to the next one. But a game asks you to get good enough at whatever challenges it offers before you can see the whole thing. You will be tested, and only those who have earned the higher levels through completing those tests will ever see them.
Critical logic failure, Kuchera. The difference is that the mediums that you're talking about are passive, while video games are an active medium. Basically, it depends on the player's input and skill, and how much they're willing to put into it. Even then, no, Kuchera, you don't actually need to pass the test in order to see what a game has to offer. Thanks to the modern day, you can actually see games in full in the style of a movie on YouTube. After all, that's enough saturation on the website that has pretty much every game on there so you can passively enjoy games. Even games that are either rare or hard to find, or don't even have a means of getting into the actual country. That's kind of what I do with Telltale games. I mean, good luck trying to find a series of videos that doesn't have some twat in the corner screeching out. Even then, oh no, the game is challenging your ability to use its mechanics and gameplay to actually get good at it. How dare the game actually do what the game is supposed to do?
Which is why so many hardcore gamers are aghast at the idea of games like Cuphead offering an easy mode or an option to skip the boss fights. The art is beautiful enough that seeing the next level is its own reward for mastering the game's punishing bosses, or at least that's the idea. If you're not good enough to finish that level, you're not deserving to see the next one. There should be no shortcuts.
This is insane! Alright, ignoring the YouTube watching thing, skip the boss fights in a boss rush game. Ben, what the hell are you smoking?
Smoke weed every day.
Yes, there are run and gun sections, but they're optional. You don't need to complete them to fight the bosses. You just go to a boss stage and you just fight them. I'm not even a hardcore gamer, and I think that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Skipping the bosses in a boss rush game. And I have to deal with MatPat and his fanboys on a daily basis. Congratulations, you reached a level of ineptitude I have not seen since...
I don't actually care about story. It's because we gamers, you and me, don't give a
When it comes to more story-based games like, say, Persona 5, I have nothing against there being an easy mode. After all, there's more to the game than just the gameplay to enjoy, and more of a story as well. But a game like Cuphead? It's more gameplay-focused, and whatever cutscenes it does have aren't exactly the most spectacular things on the planet. Skipping the bosses is practically missing the point of the game, and pretty much skipping the game.
It's a good thought and a fair read on how some people think games work, but it demands a lot out of the game itself, and Cuphead sometimes falls short.
That'd be true if the game was unfair or broken, but Cuphead isn't either. Save for one section that I've experienced myself, but that has nothing really to do with anything with the bosses, and thus not with this situation. The game controls are tight, simple to grasp, and the game does give you hints on how to beat the bosses. Yes, you may die a few times, but when you learn about the tells and how the bosses fight, they won't be that difficult. It falls on the player to learn these tips, and while I'm learning these through gameplay as a personal challenge, that doesn't stop people from looking up tips online or seeing how the bosses have different tells. That's why walkthroughs are a thing.
The conclusion of Cuphead is, I fear, what the game has broadly been perceived as, a comically difficult if not cruel experience, our review stated, and that's really a shame because the lion's share of Cuphead is a special formula that takes a notorious challenging genre of the past and carefully and lovingly introduces it to the wider audience it deserves. And that's the problem here, isn't it? The difficulty will turn some people off, and those people will never get to see the art. They will never enjoy those animations. The design of the game itself keeps them out, when the addition of an easy mode or an option to skip the bosses would allow everyone to see as much or as little as they want.
You know, I want to point out again that there's nothing really stopping the audience from picking up and enjoying the game, and there is a simple mode for the bosses. Yes, you don't get the contracts you need in order to progress through the game and then get the final boss, but it gives you the experience on how to deal with the boss's earlier forms, and still gives you a taste of the animation. I can see it as a means of practice for the bosses. Also, I'd like to point out, YouTube! If you're just going to enjoy the games for the aesthetic value, then why waste money buying it when you can just watch the animations? And yes, nitpickers, I'm aware I gave my reasons earlier, but Kuchera's argument here is just to enjoy the art. Then why waste money on something you can easily watch on YouTube without any cost? After all, it wouldn't compromise the game's design, not to mention, as I've learned through my own playthrough, and skipping the bosses, congratulations, you will be skipping the animations that you are praising so much, since that's what the bosses are. They are the animations.
So why are so many people against the idea? The question of letting everyone in to experience one aspect of the game while putting the others aside always leads into spirited debates. Because the real nub of it is, it's about exclusivity. Rock, paper, shotgun route. It's about keeping the thems, the riffraff, the outsider out. This section of the game is a special section this is special to me and only those as great as I am. I deserve this bit of the game. Those weaklings do not. Gosh, it's an ugly way of thinking, isn't it? It's so utterly idiotic too, because it requires the mental gymnastics of somehow believing that one's own isolated experience of a game is cheapened, lessened, impacted in any conceivable way by the isolated experience of someone else playing that game.
Conferring with the flowers, consulting with the rain.
How about a little fire for that scarecrow, John Walker? Your hatred of boss fights is well noted, and how you perceive people who are against the skip the boss button option is also noted. If you make a button to skip bosses, then why not make a button to skip puzzles in a puzzle game, since they're too hard? Or a button to skip the entire gameplay, and just watch the cutscenes. Yeah, it sounds like a slippery slope, but when you're actively going against the creative idea of video game creators with this stuff, I do kind of fear this thing will happen. I kind of wish I had a liver for this.
Wouldn't it be nice if we were older, then we wouldn't have to wait so long?
There's also the issue that games this difficult with no option to turn down that difficulty or skip boss fights can completely dismiss players without full motor controls of one or both hands. Now we're talking about museums that don't offer things like wheelchair ramps, and I think this metaphor has gotten away from me a bit.
Then why did you include it in your article? It seems like a low blow to put in. I mean, you're expecting developers to automatically cater to every single person, when that may not be the case, especially when there's possibility that these people won't even buy the game because of their disability. I believe that games can be played and bought by anyone, but you gotta remember that there are some people who may not buy or be interested in games. People do have different tastes, and they have to bend those tastes to what they can and can't do.
Wouldn't it be nice if we were older, then we wouldn't have to wait so long?
If players decide the value of a personal accomplishment in a game, and they do, why not let them also decide how they want to engage that game if it's technically possible? You can skip right to the end of any episode of Game of Thrones if you're watching on HBO's app, and no one will stop you. Your enjoyment will be decreased, but I'm not sure anyone would argue that the value of the show itself is diminished because you have that option.
Once again, you're conflating interactive media with passive media. And the thing about interactive media is that can be transformed into passive media. Yeah, you guys already know what I'm gonna get at here. And actually, yeah, I could argue that the value of the show itself is diminished. Why? Because if you actually take that option, you're actually skipping everything that could lead up to the end of the episode, missing vital plot points that could potentially be essential for future events or add context to previous scenes.
Game design can indicate where value should be, but it's impossible to enforce those suggestions in any meaningful way once the game is out in the wild. And it's hard to argue that those indications should be canonical due to authorial intent when they may keep someone from playing the game at all, unless that was the entire point of their inclusion. Are you owed the final scene of a game if you buy it, regardless of your physical ability or mastery of what the game is trying to teach you? Can exclusion be a valid artistic goal?
I mean, you're acting like this hasn't been done in video games beforehand. I mean, take for example Final Fantasy X-2. In order to get the true final ending, you have to complete everything. You have to get 100% of every piece of content. And that means every side quest, every boss, every item that you can find, and even talking to every single person in the entire game at least once. Yeah, you have to do that to get 100%. But you know what's really funny about all this? Right after this line, you show a video showcasing all the bosses, all the animation from a YouTube video. You have pretty much just made this article into a wall of complaining when there was an easier, free alternative to the game. After all, if you're skipping the bosses of Cuphead, the thing that drives the gameplay of the game, then what's the difference between just watching the bosses on YouTube?
Whether or not you're bothered by seeing boss fights you didn't earn yourself, of course, is up to you.
If you had a skip boss button, you wouldn't earn it either, since the boss rush is the point of the game. And just, wow. So this is what journalism is like in gaming. Look, there's nothing to stop you from actually buying or playing Cuphead, or any other game there is, aside your financial situation. Yeah, you need to be able to practice to beat the game, but that's kind of the point of games. You play, you get good, you win. You may not win all the time. I know I certainly don't, but you still will gain experience. That's true to anything if you practice something. Yeah, it may not be at the same rate as other people, but you will get better. And there are other alternatives to this. There are plenty. I've listed them throughout the entire video. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below what you thought about this article and this video in particular. I'm TrashKamen, and remember to examine your fandom.